Hello, I'm Allison Thorpe, and this is God Talk, recorded and produced in the bluegrass state of Kentucky, the home of horses, hills, hiking, hillbillies, big trucks, wildcat basketball, and Daniel Boone, the state where guns are honored and shoes are optional. This is the show where science, faith, and culture are discussed openly.
Welcome to God Talk, a show where a rocket scientist and a medical doctor, who is also my pastor, talk about science and religion. I'm your host, Doug Thorpe, and with me as always is my co-host, Dr. Andy White. Today on God Talk, we are going to interview Dr. Tom Campbell. He's a physicist, and we're going to be talking about his big toe.
Exactly, Doug.
What in the world is his big toe?
That's a little confusing. Yeah, his book is called My Big T.O.E, and he's written a book. He's written, I believe, several books. We'll see, but his most famous work is My Big Theory of Everything. And
Theory of Everything.
Yeah, Theory of Everything. So this is a physicist who, in the short version is, he's come up with a way, evidentially, is what he claims, and, not just anecdotally, a way that he brings together basically metaphysics with physics. And by metaphysics, I mean the study of existence and the soul and the mind and all the things that don't fit into science that we talk about. He has a way of bridging those things, and basically it comes from a lot of work on consciousness and his understanding of consciousness and creation out of consciousness. So we'll see what he says.
Interesting.
It's a complicated theory. It's going to be a little deep today, but we'll try to get it right. So first, this is God Talk, where we rightly divide the line between science and faith.
And this is God Talk, where we faithfully examine science and reasonably examine faith. You can find God Talk at god-talk.com. You can find our audio files at soundcloud.com, as well as on YouTube. The videos on YouTube, as well as the audios on iTunes.
Absolutely. Got to remember iTunes.
Yeah, got to remember iTunes. That's where we have our most downplays.
And of course, god-talk.com, our website. We're always updating it and adding our shows. You can get them on there too as well.
Well, actually, we recently put all the people that we're going to have, all our guests are in there. Go to the show page, and you can find a whole list of everybody we're going to have in the next coming months.
Great. Okay, well, let's get Tom on the line in a minute. Tom has been a researcher in altered states of consciousness. He's worked at the Monroe Institute with Bob Monroe. He's a physicist. He's been a NASA scientist, an international lecturer. He provides a theory of mind and consciousness that really brings together metaphysics and physics. And of course, that's what we talk about on this show, the line between faith and science. So he's particularly a really good guest for us to talk to today. He's worked in large system simulation engineering, technology integration, risk analysis at NASA. He's developed U.S. missile defense systems. And I think he's had about 30 years of research involved in his theory of everything. And he claims that what I've heard, no creeds or dogmas. He's not tied to any specific dogmatic belief system, but he presents a theory of everything based on evidential and experiential information. So
I think it's going to be a good show. I'd love to hear from
I'm excited. Tom. So Tom, if you would, just give us a little bit of your background for the audience, and specifically, if you would, tell us about how you got into working with Bob Monroe and the Monroe Institute.
Okay. Well, as you said, I'm a physicist, but I'm also a consciousness researcher, and I started both of those careers at about the same time. I just gotten out of graduate school in physics, did my thesis work in experimental nuclear physics, and I hadn't been on the job for more than a few months when I got an opportunity to meet Bob Monroe. My boss actually had read one of his books, Journeys Out of the Body, and he asked me to read it. And we kind of looked at each other and said, well, is this stuff real, or is he just making this up to sell books? We didn't know, so we found out that where Bob lived was only about an hour away from where we were. So an arrangement was made to go see him, and I was real anxious to see, is this guy, a hustler, or, is he serious, or what? So, because I'm a physicist, and what physicists do is model reality. So after reading his book, if it was true, then there was a whole nother part of reality that I didn't know anything about, and was just, I needed to explore and understand, because that's what the way physicists think. And if he was just hustling books, then, I could dismiss it. So I wanted to go see Bob. Well, when we did make that arrangement, and there was about a dozen of us or so, went out to see him from where I worked, and most of us were either engineers or scientists or mathematicians or that sort. And at the time, I was working for Army Technical Intelligence. So this was a technical intelligence, means it was all the engineers and scientists trying to understand technology all over the globe and what we could borrow from it and how could we beat the enemies and that kind of thing. So
Sure.
that was my first job. Anyway, we went out there, and it turned out that Bob Monroe was a very straightforward, honest guy. He was a wealthy guy, so he didn't need to hustle books. He, lived on a 500-acre gentleman's farm, and, had horses running in the pasture with whiteboard fences and all that sort of thing. So I knew that he wasn't hustling books. He was probably a millionaire or a multimillionaire in his own right. He was the president and founder of a major cable company, and so he was well-to-do, and he had these out-of-body experiences happen to him spontaneously. He didn't want them to happen. They scared him half to death. He tried not to have them happen. He went to a psychiatrist and said, "Am I going crazy, or what's going on here?" And after he just played with them and dealt with them for a while, he realized that there was something real about them, that he could actually gather in information and do things and see things and so on that he shouldn't really be able to. So he started to experiment with it. And when I ran into him, he had just finished building a laboratory for the study of consciousness, because he didn't like the idea that he was, kind of the weird guy that had this weird stuff happen to him. He wanted this phenomena to be understood, measured as much as possible, reproduced as much as possible, and turned into science. So he was looking for a couple of scientists to help him work in his lab. And I and myself and another fellow that was with me, Dennis Menrick, and Dennis is an electronic engineer. We jumped at the chance and said, "Yes, we'd love to do that. We'd like to be your scientist if you teach us what you know about exploring this larger consciousness system, this larger reality." So that was the deal we made. So we started going out to see Bob Monroe like 3 times a week and spending 3 or 4 hours each time. Our evenings from like 6:30 in the evening till like 2 o'clock in the morning were all spent out at that time. It was Whistlefield Farms, which was Bob's estate, and at the lab. And Dennis and I would work to build the equipment, because the lab was just a building. It was build them and they will come sort of thing. He really didn't know what he was going to do with it. He just knew he had to build the lab, and sure enough, we showed up right about the time the lab was finished. So, synchronicity was working pretty well.
Yeah.
And we had to build equipment and outfit it and that sort of thing. So we helped set the lab up, and then we started doing experiments. So that's how I got into being a consciousness researcher. And I worked with Bob probably, 15 to 20 hours a week for 5 or 6 years. And what happened is that we became so successful at being able to train other people to have similar experiences, to make it repeatable. That was one of our goals, that we started to get inundated with people who wanted us to, do them, to, put them as part of the class of subjects that we were studying. So eventually we had so many people that wanted to do this that we became more like trainers than researchers, because we were overwhelmed with demand. So sometime around then, Dennis and I kind of slipped out the back, and Bob made a business of it. And that's now the Monroe Institute, which you can Google, and it's a going concern. Not at the same lab or at the same quarters anymore, but the same Monroe Institute. Anyway, so that's how I got started in this. Now, being a physicist, my my job at the lab, besides just working and doing the experiments and so on, was to try to understand what was going on, why it was going on, what were the limitations. Was it real? Was it verifiable? What were the statistics of Bob doing these things? And could Dennis and I learn to do it? And if we could learn to do it, what sort of validation could we come up with? Because we were both kind of hard-headed science types, and we weren't going to be convinced of this stuff too easily. So that's kind of the way we went into it. But eventually, Bob was a very good teacher. He taught us how to experience this larger consciousness system, how to do experiments in it, how to collect data. And we spent the first few years just doing evidential stuff, collecting data, things that we could verify that the information we were getting was indeed real information. So that was several years worth, and then I kept at it because I hadn't answered the question of what's going on here, how does it work, and why does it work, and what's going on. So I continued to do research in the larger reality system, the non-physical, if you will, for the next 30 years, and I'm still doing that. And after I got to about 19, I guess it was like 97 or so, I thought I understood it well enough to start writing it down. Because once you write something down, it creates clarity. You're forced to be clear when you write. It's easy to be fuzzy when you talk. So I started writing, and I kept writing, and I kept passing it out to people and say, do you understand what I'm saying here? And everybody's eyes rolled up in their head, and they said no. So I had to write more, and eventually I had so much material I ended up publishing 3 books. So that's how I ended up with My Big T.O.E, and the T.O.E is an acronym. It's a physics term for theory of everything. And the reason that I had it My Big T.O.E isn't because I was so proud of it, but because if it's not your experience, it can't be your truth. This is something that you have to experience. You have to be able to, and it's not hard to do. It doesn't take very long or actually too many months to learn how to explore the larger consciousness system. So it's something you have to experience. You have to test. You have to verify it for yourself. Otherwise, you're stuck in the position of either believing it or not believing it, and that's just not a good position to be in. That doesn't really buy you anything. So My Big T.O.E is just a launch ground for the reader's Big T.O.E, for their own Big T.O.E. Because if you stay open-minded and stay skeptical, all roads lead to the same place. You will end up figuring a lot of it out. And my book will kind of give you a guide of kind of a way, a context, I guess, in which you can interpret your experiences. So that's kind of in a nutshell how a nice physicist like me ended up in a place like consciousness research into out of body and the larger consciousness system. So it's been a long, enjoyable experience for me, and now I spend most of my time going places and talking to people, because what happened, I didn't expect this to happen. I intended with my books to write a theory of consciousness, a theory of the larger reality, and I didn't really intend to write new physics. And after I had it published, it's probably about 2 years after I published it. I published these in 2003, in February. A couple of years later, I realized that the exact same principles, the exact same understanding, that the same logic that explained consciousness and this larger consciousness system also was a better explanation of physics, and that the big problems in physics that physicists were stuck and hadn't been able to answer for almost 100 years now, like with quantum mechanics. Why are particles best represented as probability distributions? Things like entanglement, things like tunneling, all these quantum mechanical effects. Scientists just say, weird science. We don't know. Nobody will ever know. It's just too hard to understand.
Right.
But once you understand the nature of reality and the nature of consciousness, it's easy to understand. It's just logical. It couldn't be any other way. It has to work the way it works. And the second one was relativity. Relativity is based on this one idea is the fundamental basis of it. It's where Einstein started with special relativity, and that is that the speed of light is a constant. Well, nothing else works that way. Everything else, velocities are added. In other words, if you're in a car going 30 mile an hour and you throw a ball out the window at another 10 mile an hour, then the ball is going to be going 40 mile an hour, the 30 from the car and the 10 from your throw. You see, velocities add, but it's not like that with light. It doesn't matter how fast your light source is going, the light always goes at the same speed. And that is, if you have that fact and a little bit of algebra, you end up with Einstein's special relativity. And then you include gravity and you end up with his general relativity. So that fact is, why is C a constant? It's just a big unknown. And how does, tunneling, that's where particles kind of teleport, go from one place to another. And that's a scientific fact. And it's such a fact that we have tunneling diodes. We depend on that for our electronics. That happens. So those things all became perfectly clear and logical. And then I realized that consciousness is fundamental. Well, I knew that on a philosophical, but I got it kind of at a different level when I realized that the physical world is derived from consciousness, not the other way around.
I'm going to jet in there just a second, and because I have a question that goes on that. I want you to define for the audience consciousness and explain the role that you think consciousness plays in reality.
Wow, that's a big one.
Well, just give us a start, because the audience is going to wonder, what do you mean by consciousness? I know what you mean, but they may not understand. Yeah. And how does that play such a role in reality? And then I think Doug has a follow-up question, but I want to start with that.
Well, what is consciousness? Consciousness is, it's nothing. I don't have a strange definition of consciousness. It's, I guess I would ask your listeners, are you conscious? And if you answer yes, then I'd say, well, why do you think you're conscious? What is it that makes you think you're conscious? Well, most people would say, well, it's an awareness. I'm aware of things. Mm-hmm. It's a sharing of data. Now, that would surprise some people, but if you think, what is your awareness? What are you aware of? And you would look around and say, well, I'm aware I'm in a house, I got walls, I'm sitting in a chair, here's my hand, I'm aware of all this stuff. Well, if you think about it, all that is just information. It's sense data. It's your eyes and your ears and your sense of touch and smell, and it's giving you information. And that information comes to you, and you convert those digital signals, which is a little electrical impulses, say, at the retina. When light hits the retina, it creates little electrical impulses, which then go down nerves and modify neurons and that sort of thing. So that's just data. It's digital data, and you take in this digital data, and that's what defines your reality. So consciousness is really dealing in information. Awareness is aware of what? Well, the what is information. So on a fundamental level, consciousness is an information system. On a practical level, consciousness is just, an awareness. Of course, what we're aware of is what our senses, provide for us to be aware of, what our thoughts, what our, ideas, we're aware of all of that.
Yeah, you could say it's self-awareness.
That's what consciousness is. There's nothing odd about my definition of consciousness. It's just, it is the most fundamental thing. Everything else is a derivative or is derived from consciousness. Consciousness is fundamental. Our physical reality, our universe that we live in, that is derived from consciousness. As it turns out, it's a virtual reality, which means based on information. And guess what? In the last decade, scientists agree with me. Most physicists now understand that our reality has to be information-based. It has to be a virtual reality because that's what their experiments tell them. That's what the experiments are forcing them to get. So a lot of physicists are still struggling with that, but I'd say quite a large number. I don't know that it'd be a majority, but certainly a large minority and growing every day of physicists are convinced that our universe, our physical world, is information-based, is virtual. So not just, me that has that in the theory. Science is confirming that fact and has been more and more as every month I see papers in the physics journals talking about it. Yep, it's a virtual reality. No other assumption will fit the data. So that's what consciousness is. It's information.
And you say consciousness is primary, and material comes after that. Consciousness is primary, material comes from that. And,
that's right.
All right. Hey, let me back up a little bit. And we know that you're a physicist and that you work for NASA. Can you...
He has, yeah.
Yeah. Can you clarify that and say, well, where did you go to school? As well as how long did you work for NASA, and which NASA center did you work for? That type of thing. And
oh, sure. If you want a little bit of a, what do they call that? A CV.
Right.
Kind of a resume, right? I did undergraduate work, and I got two majors out of that, a math and a physics major, and that was in a small college, private school called Bethany College, and there I went to Purdue to pursue a master's degree in physics, and got a master's degree then 2 years later. And then I went to pursue a PhD, spent, I think I was probably 4 or 5 years doing the PhD in experimental nuclear physics, did the research, did the thesis, got the thesis written up and done and publishable. And at that time, myself and my major professor had a bit of a falling out on the understanding. I thought I'd done it, and he said, yeah, really great work and gets published and all that, but I'd like you to do another one. So we parted ways because I had some synchronicity waiting for me. That was that job that was in a couple of months going to introduce me to Bob Monroe, and the rest of my life took a drastic change after that. So all of that needed to happen. So I left then. So I don't actually have a PhD degree, but I do have a PhD education, including the thesis and all the coursework, and passed all the tests and that kind of thing. So
sure.
That's my academic background. Then I worked for technical intelligence for the Army. I went to then work in missile defense, worked as a contractor mostly, and that I ended up toward the end of that. Well, that got turned into, now it's Missile Defense Agency. I guess it was Star Wars. Before that, it had other names. But then I ended up at NASA, and it was Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville. This is where I worked. That's the integration center for all the shuttle work. And I did risk analysis for them. Large system risk analysis. And what that means is that, the shuttle and all its systems has so many components, so many parts that all have to work together. And all these parts are made by, 1,000 or 2,000 different companies. So when you put all the parts together, everything has to work flawlessly, because if something goes wrong, it could be a disaster for the astronauts that are on board. So they take their risk analysis very, very seriously. It's such a complex system that what they needed to know is, well, if this goes wrong, what does that mean? What goes wrong next? You see, the things that go wrong are in a sequence. If this goes wrong, then that affects this other thing, which affects this other thing, and, about 10 more levels down into other things, something blows up and the whole mission is lost. So you have to understand how this very complex system interacts. All the piece parts interact with each other, and the sensitivity it has to various things going wrong. So that's the kind of work I did for NASA.
Okay. I have a yes or no answer for you, I hope. Was the shuttle safer after 134 missions than the new SLS that hasn't ever flown once?
Yeah, they made a big change in the way. That's about the time, just as that was happening, it's about the time I decided I needed to retire again.
Okay.
My working for NASA was after I'd already retired twice.
Oh.
So I decided to make it a final third time. And so that was going on around that time. And what happened was they decided that instead of having the government actually do the work, the government would just be the monitors and the kind of the decision makers, but it would all get farmed out to industry. So they basically took NASA apart, and what was done by government people was now all going to be done by industry.
Okay.
And that was the idea. And so far, you like you said, there's not been a whole lot done with that. There's been, I think, some robotic missions that have been successful, but the manned mission kind of dropped to the background. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. The manned mission got a lot of press, and it had a lot of communication value. It had a lot of marketing value for NASA, but most of the real hardcore science was done by robots. When you take a lander and land it on, Moon, Saturn or something, you get a whole lot much more science than you do by, making a man go up and spin around the globe.
Right. Well, Tom, let me, we're crunched for time here, so we're wanting to get some more details on the conscious and your other work here. Andy, you got a quick question?
I have a question. Yeah, you guys could talk NASA for an hour, and I'm gonna fall asleep on that. I want to talk consciousness. So I want to know, I want to know when you started to work for Monroe. I'm just thinking as a scientist myself. We're both scientists, and we're always seeking evidential, basis for paranormal things like the nature of consciousness, whether or not there's a soul, and whether or not metaphysics has any basis. So I'm just thinking, when you did that, what were some of the things you experienced that convinced you that in fact it's not just make-believe or somebody's idea, that it's in fact consciousness is the basis of all reality? What were some of the things that you experienced for our listeners? Yeah.
Okay, well, there was a lot of things. We did that, like I say, for years, because we were pretty hard-headed, and we needed, not just proof, but we needed really, really solid proof. So we did things that you could check on later. A lot of that would now be classed under remote viewing. That is, you go into one of these altered states, you go out of body, you go see something, and then you report. You come back and say, well, it's such and such a place, these people in this house at this time, they are, doing this, or at this park, there's so many people there, or whatever. You do that kind of thing, and then you check it to see whether that's the way it was, or you have, when they do this with remote viewing, they basically pick targets where they know where they are by coordinates or something, and then have the people describe, and then they judge how well they did. Well, we did that kind of thing where you would go places, see things, and then see if that was really what was going on there. And they had to be evidential things. You couldn't just be, well, I went to look at my in-laws and they were sitting around watching TV. Well, that's not evidential,
right?
See, because that's probably what they do every night. Sit around and watch TV. So that stuff wouldn't work. It had to be things that were very evidential. You went to go see your in-laws, and there was a red flower vase with roses in it, sitting on top of the refrigerator.
Exactly.
That kind of thing. Well, that's kind of odd. You don't generally put your flowers up on top of the refrigerator and whatever. Besides, if they're real flowers, they don't last that long, so it's something that comes and goes. And if these people were actually living, say, 500 or 600 miles away in another state, it was that kind of thing.
Yeah,
so then
sure.
you call them up on the telephone and say, hey, do you have a bunch of, red roses sitting on top of your refrigerator? And, that way you get evidence. So we were pretty careful about the kind of things we did. That was one thing. You got it that way. Another thing that we did was healing. Used our minds, our intents, to change people's health, to heal people. Now, that's a statistical thing. If you say, well, I went out of body and I saw this person and I saw these health problems they were having and I did this and now they're going to be all right. And then sure enough, they're all right. Well, that doesn't mean you did anything. They may have just gotten all right anyway.
Right.
You have to do that like 500 times or 1,000 times and get statistics on it. Because if you're not if you're really doing something, then it's not going to be that half the time you're right and half the time you're wrong. If you're really doing something, then it's going to be 80% of the time you're right, maybe 20% of the time you're wrong. And then you learn the difference between that 80% and that 20%, so you get better at it because you practice. You begin to sense and get information about the difference between the times you're right and wrong. What are you doing differently? What changed? And eventually, you get to where you can affect these sorts of things, pretty easily. So it's mostly statistics based as far as that goes. Now, sometimes we'd go get in the out-of-body state, and Bob would go after we were already in the booths, and we had isolation booths that we used that were acoustically isolated from each other. They had solid metal all around the walls. They were electromagnetically isolated. They were isolation booths. And after we were in there and the doors were shut, he'd go into another room and say, write a 7-digit number on the blackboard. And we were to look and see what that number was. And we did things like going forward in time and trying to read headlines to see what the local paper would have on its headline a week from now, or 2 weeks from now, or a month from now. So just anything that we could think of that was something that was, that would have a clear evidential, you either got it right or you didn't, and sometimes you got in gray areas like, well, it's sort of right, but sort of wrong too, and those, of course, don't count. You have to get it right. So that's what we did, and after a couple of years of that, the statistics said that we were really doing something unusual that was not normal. So we call that paranormal, kind of a beyond normal. And we knew that, but that's, when you know something like that intellectually, it's very different than getting it at a deeper knowing, being level. You get it down in your gut rather than in your head. So we knew after the first year or two that the statistics were like 10,000 to 1, that we were just good guessers.
Sure.
That's the kind of statistics you do. What's the probability that you could just do this with a guess? And it turned out that it was like 10,000 to 1 that we were just really good guessers. So the science said, you guys are doing something real. You're connecting with this information in some kind of paranormal way. But of course, it didn't tell us how we were doing that, just that it was happening. And then the thing that clinched it for me was that Dennis and I, this was an experiment that Bob thought up. He sent Dennis and I out of body together, instructed us to meet up above the lab and then go off on an adventure together. And the important thing was always stay together, don't lose each other. So we did that, and we didn't do a kind of a near-Earth evidential this time. We just went off into the larger consciousness system. And, we met beings, we did things, we saw stuff, we had conversations with each other. It was about an hour and a half to 2 hours long. And we, again, were in isolated booths, so we didn't hear each other. Bob had we had microphones that we talked into reporting what we were seeing and what we were saying and what we were doing. And Bob had each of our audio lines being recorded on a cassette tape. Now, Bob could talk to us individually. He could talk to Dennis. He could talk to me. And so he would ask some questions sometimes that would direct us. But Bob was very careful about never to lead the witness. He was not. He was pretty good as far as that sort of thing went. So anyway, we got done and we stumbled out of the booth, and each one of us had just had our own experience. And we walked out to the control room where Bob was, and Bob had this grin on his face, and he says, "Well, did you two think that you were together?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I think so." And then I said, "Yeah, it seemed like it." So he said, "Listen to this," and he flipped both the switches on those two cassettes. It was my audio track and Dennis's audio track, and there on that audio track, these two separate tapes playing now. Dennis and I were having conversations. We were answering each other's questions. We were pointing things out. Oh, do you see that such and such over there? And Dennis was looking and said, oh, yeah, it's got this and this. And it was, we were together. We had
That's
seen
amazing.
the same things, talked to the same people, had the same conversations. And the only difference between the two of us was just the difference you'd expect between two people, looking at things slightly differently. But it was just completely obvious that we actually worked together. And that was the thing that got me at the gut level. After that, I probably spent 2 weeks in kind of a daze saying, my God, it's real.
Yeah.
And I probably repeated that 100 times in those 2 weeks.
Well, Tom, I just want to say the two things that I draw from that are, number one, the mind is not the same thing as the brain. The mind cannot be the same thing as the physical brain. And two, so many of the circumstances that we base what we think about reality every day is not what we think. I mean, there's much more. There has to be much more to reality than material, if this is the case.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The brain has nothing to do with consciousness.
Right.
Most all your consciousness researchers are trying to figure out how the brain makes consciousness, and that's just wrong-headed.
It's
The
wrong-headed.
brain doesn't make consciousness. Consciousness, creates the brain. This is a virtual reality. The brain is a virtual brain. Our body is a virtual body. It's just information. That's what the physicists are finding. The physical world, which includes brain and body, that's part of the physical world, is just information-based. It's ones and zeros on a hard drive in a computer someplace, you see, just information. What the body does is it sets the constraints on what the consciousness can do with it.
Sure.
So think of an individuated unit of consciousness playing a video game, and your body and brain are the avatar.
Right.
So just like you play a video game like World of Warcraft, and your elf or your barbarian is the avatar. Well, you are a consciousness playing a video game, and your body and brain and so on, the physical world, you see, is this virtual reality. Your body is the avatar. So the brain just sets constraints, just like the body does. You see, the body evolved according to a rule set. If somebody hits you in the head with a pipe and does brain damage, well, then maybe you talk with a slur and drag your left leg because you have new constraints now according to the rule set by which this virtual reality evolved.
The filter is broke.
We're not programmed like World of Warcraft. We have a set initial conditions, which is basically high pressure, high temperature ball of plasma. And then we have a rule set, which is basically all the fundamental science, whether we've figured it out yet or not. And then somebody hits the run button, and that plasma expands, and we call that a bang. It expands with a bang, so that's the Big Bang. It's a big digital bang, and that's the beginning of the simulation. And after that, this universe and everything in it evolved according to the rule set. You see, so that rule set has all the biology and physics in it, which means when your brain gets damaged, it can compute different constraints on what, that avatar can do. And your elf is the same way. When your elf falls off a cliff and gets damaged, then you, the player, or the consciousness of that elf, you can't do all the things you used to do. And now you just lost a bunch of hit points, or something else happened, and you have to play a damaged character for a while. So that's the way it works. And no, the brain has nothing to do with consciousness. It's a virtual brain. And yes, reality is much bigger than this physical universe. This physical universe is just a very small thing in a much larger, grander reality frame that is based on consciousness. That larger reality is what I call the larger consciousness system. And since you are theology-based and interested in God, then that larger consciousness system would be God. Okay, that's the way that would the source. And if you think about it, well, what is God? I was on a platform, and if you look at my videos, you'll find one in Atlanta, and I was there with two people who both had PhDs in theology. They were both ministers. And I asked them, I said, tell me what are the characteristics? What are the qualities? What's the essence of God? Tell me, what are the characteristics? What is God? And they went through and listed things, and because they were universalist ministers, they didn't have much dogma in it. They just said, characteristics were, knows everything, that's going on, does this, tries to help, we're in the image, and they did some things like that, and all of the things they said were things that described the larger consciousness system to a T.
Yeah, so, different name for the same entity. Yeah.
Yeah, it basically is the same thing. You see, we are not bodies, we're individuated units of consciousness. We're a piece of this larger consciousness system. We're a piece of it. And if you want to say that we're made in its image, well, yes, we're a piece of that. Sure. That digital consciousness system, and yes, it is aware of what's going on, and yes, it is intelligent, and yes, it did create this virtual reality that is our universe. And so you can go through all these things, and that's basically, that's kind of the connection, I guess, between My Big T.O.E. and theology, is that My Big T.O.E. kind of derives theology, but it does it without the dogma, without the sectarian stuff. Everybody has a lot of it right. Like the Buddha said that our physical reality is an illusion. Well, yes, I say it's a virtual reality. They're the same thing. The Christian said God is love, and well, yes, the larger consciousness system defines love. Love is the characteristic of a low entropy consciousness. So you see all these things that are in theology, the fundamental things, not the ritual or the dogmatic things, but the fundamental things. It all seems to fit together. Matter of fact, that was a big surprise to me. See, here I am, this hard-headed physicist. Probably be called atheist or agnostic. Think about religion. This is me now when I'm 20-something years old, right?
Sure.
And I think about religion, and I'm thinking about, wow, gee, that's so dumb. I can't imagine all these people, and they are involved in a religion. That's so barbaric. And then I get into this work with consciousness, and guess what I find out? most all the fundamental truths that I find based on my physics and my logic are the same things that the theologians have been saying for the last 5,000 years.
That's amazing. That's an amazing awareness. Right. Go ahead, Doug. You have a question.
Hey, Tom, I have a couple questions for you. First of all, did you do anything tangible or profitable, or I don't know what's the way to do it, to help the military or anything with this technology, or was it just basic research? And the second question is, can anybody do this, develop this technique after a couple months, I think is what you said?
Yeah. Well, the first question was, what did I do for the military?
I mean, yeah, did you do anything that was tangible that you can make a profit? If you look ahead 2 months in advance, can you use that technology to, that information to come back and bet high on that?
I think he's asking, though, is remote viewing, has it been used in the military? Has that kind of technology been used in that way?
Yeah, the remote viewing, I don't know if they're still doing it, but the CIA had a very robust remote viewing group, and a bunch of books have been written about that, so that they could, basically look at things that otherwise they didn't have access to. And that had a lot of successes. But, of course, you can't talk about those things in public because, the public would kind of shake their head and say, nonsense, it must be a waste of money.
Right.
So they were done in secret mostly. So, yes, that was going on. They claim now that it's not going on any longer, but, who knows the difference between what is and what they claim. So hard to say if it's really going on now or not.
Sure.
I didn't do any of that kind of stuff. What I did when I was working for the government and then for industry later was just being a physicist. I had pretty much a wall between those two worlds. I kept my consciousness research at kind of a low visibility because for the same reason, it doesn't play well in the minds of most people.
Right.
So I kept that to myself. So I had two careers, but they didn't overlap any. So no, I didn't do anything like that at all. What I did was math and equations and modeling reality and all kinds of physics stuff, and that was entirely separate from my mental stuff. Except there is some overlap, and that is that I was better able and more successful to do good physics because I had a lot of intuition. So when you have developed your intuition, it actually makes you a better scientist.
Sure.
So I had that advantage. That's why I ended up in solving big complex problems, because they're very, very hard problems, and there's almost nobody that goes into that because it's too big a thing. And it's like, well, where do I start? I've got this problem. It's got 10,000 parts and 100,000 interactions between parts. And where do I start? How do you figure out what's sensitive to what in all of that? And it's just such a large problem that hardly anybody tries to work it. Well, that was my specialty. I did those, and that's because I could intuit things that led me to answers that then I had to verify, of course, with the physics. But I had a little edge up on people because of that. So that's the only way. But no, I didn't do anything paranormal for any of the people I worked for in my physics career.
Can
what was the other?
Can most people do this?
How do you go about doing it?
Yeah.
Yes, and how long does it take? Well, it depends on the individual, of course. What you need to do first is to learn to lower the noise in your consciousness. Most of us have a consciousness that's yipping and yapping all the time. It's just constantly churning on stuff and thinking of things, and you have to be able to let that all go. You have to have a quiet mind, and the tool for that is typically meditation. So you learn to meditate, and what meditation means is you learn to sit still and not think of anything. Empty your mind. And that takes some practice and some discipline before you can get rid of all the noise. So that's step number one, get rid of the noise. The second step is you understand, of course, most people, even if they do paranormal things, don't really understand how it works. But one of the fundamental facts about our reality is that intent, focused intent, of a consciousness modifies future probability. So that's how the healing works. That's how the placebo effect works. That's how that's how the power of positive thinking works. It explains a lot of things. A lot of science gets explained with that as well. But anyway, once you get rid of the noise and therefore have a clear mind that you can focus with a clear intent, you can start doing these things. You can remote view. You can you can modify future probability. Now, the next things that get in the way are fear and ego and belief. And those are all tied together. Fear is the opposite of love. And fear creates the ego and the belief. Now, as much as you have fear and the fear creating these egos and beliefs, then you have a real hard time doing these things because the fear gets in the way of you focusing your intent. You can't focus your intent very well. It has to be focused at the being level, not from the intellectual level, and it has to be clear and calm and powerful, and that requires that you get rid of the fear. Now, if what is prayer but focused intent, right? It's a consciousness with an intention and focus. And some people are really good at that, and they can see results, and some people aren't. And the difference is the amount of noise they have and the amount of fear and belief and that sort of thing. So anybody can learn. I'd say that if you start with remote viewing and healing, just using your intent to do that. And if you want to get some instruction on it, my videos, a lot of my workshops, I spend the last day of them telling people about how to interact with the larger consciousness system. How can you learn to do these? Because I tell people, if it's not your experience, it's not your truth. So now I have to give them some way that they can make it their experience. So I teach a little bit about how to remote view, how to heal, because those are two easy things to do. Once you get your mind settled down, you can probably find success at both of those, in I don't know, as early as 2 months, probably not much more than 6 months worth of practicing, say, once or twice a day.
Wow.
It's not that hard to do.
Tom,
So
I wanted to...
go to the Calgary workshop on YouTube. I have like 140 videos, and at the end of it, day one is an introduction. That's Friday. Saturday, I talk all about the theory and how and why it works. And Sunday, I talk about how to go experience it. So if you go to Sunday and listen to that, you'll get instructions about how you can do this, things to do, things not to do.
Okay, we have just a couple more questions, and I wanted to ask you about karma. That people talk about in the world. Mm-hmm. In other words, the theory that if you do good things, if you put out love in the universe, you get back love. If you put out evil, you get back evil. There are different ways of describing it. How does that fit in with your theory of everything?
Well, that fits in real well. But there are some people who take that to an extreme that just isn't true. And that is, they'll say that you step on somebody's foot and somebody's going to have to step on your foot,
right.
And that sort of thing. And it doesn't work like that. You murder somebody, somebody's going to have to murder you. And that's not the way it works at all. Basically, karma results from the fact that with our intent, we create our reality. We modify future probabilities. So if you have a very fearful intent, a very negative intent, what you will do is create negativity. You'll create things you'll make your fears come true. You'll manifest your fears. If you're very positive and person and you have a lot of love, then you create that. So that's one way that it works. And the other way is that the whole point, what we're doing here, why we are in this reality in the video game that we're in, why we're playing this game is to grow up, to become love, to become, you might say, more spiritual, would be a way of putting it in religious terms, or in my science terms, it's to lower the entropy of your consciousness. But it all amounts to the same thing. It amounts to growing up to become love. We're evolving the quality of our consciousness. Okay, that's what we're here for. And you don't graduate, you don't get passed up to the next level until you've completed the level you're on. It's not like, well, I've worked at this for a long time, why don't you give me a pass? Well, no. You have to grow up. You have to get rid of that fear. And until you get rid of that fear, you're going to have to deal with the results of being fearful, which means you're going to be frustrated, unhappy, struggling all the time, and all that negative stuff is going to happen to you because you bring that with you with your fear. You create it. So in that way, what you're saying, of course, works fine. If you are love and caring, then your life, is fun. It's joyful. It's satisfying. If you are full of fear and ego and belief, then your life is a struggle, and it is unhappy and miserable. There's a lot of pain in your life. So that kind of comes out then as this karma thing, is that you get back what you give, and yes, that's the way it works. It's the nature of consciousness to be that way, and it's not that you're going to get punished because you did something awful, so now you have to be punished for it. It's not about punishment. You did something awful, and you have to outgrow that, and as long as you don't outgrow it, you're going to have things that are not so nice going on in your life. So it's not punishment. It's just the fact of life, the way it works. So that's how that's how those two things work.
And then the other thing would be, how does your theory tie in or explain the afterlife and relate to things like near-death experiences?
Okay, well, it has to do with an afterlife because you are consciousness. You're not a physical body. Okay, think of you playing the elf. If you're playing the elf in World of Warcraft and your elf dies, well, what happens? Well, you
Sure.
go back and you get another elf, right?
Right.
Or you reconstitute that one.
So there is no death. There is no death,
Right,
really.
there
It's
is
an
no
illusion.
death.
That's what...
Right, your consciousness. So as long as you're playing World of Warcraft and your elf dies, you are the elf's consciousness. You just keep on keeping on. You keep learning the game, growing, making your skills better, and that's the way it works in our reality. This is a virtual reality. So when a body dies, well, so what? That's just a virtual reality. You're a consciousness, not a body.
Right.
And the consciousness doesn't die. The consciousness is non-physical. The consciousness is not part of this physical thing. It has nothing to do with the brain. And it is immortal in that, relative to this physical reality. So nothing, the consciousness keeps going. Now, why does it have to keep going? Well, it's because it's not done yet. This getting rid of fear and becoming love takes a lot of effort, and it takes a lot of time. So once you die, what do you do next? Well, you get back into the game because you've got more to learn. It's too much just to learn in one shot. You have to get back into the game and try again. You see, so that's really the idea. I call it a different experience package, but typically people call that reincarnation.
Yeah.
So it's just, and the reason you have to do that is because learning is cumulative. You can't learn, unless it's a very trivial thing. Learning has to be iterative and cumulative. In other words, you can't learn, subtraction until you understand addition, and you can't learn multiplication until you understand both of those, and you can't learn algebra until you've got arithmetic, and you can't learn calculus until you really understand algebra. And it's just like that. You can't say, well, I'm 5 years old, now I'm in school, I want to do calculus. You see? You just can't do that. Learning is a cumulative process, and it takes a lot of time, and that's why you don't incarnate 500 lives at once, because that's not a cumulative process. You see, that's a parallel process.
Right.
It's not efficient. You have to do one, or sometimes if there's a good reason to, or something. It's not that you can't do multiples, but basically it has to be a linear process so that what you learn this time you can apply to your challenges next time, and so on. That's how growth happens. So so the consciousness is immortal. It goes on. It's got a job to do, and it's in this virtual reality, learning to let go of its fear and become love. That's why we're here.
All right. Hey, Tom, let me, hopefully this may be the last question, and we're going to have to invite you back because we're quickly running out of time here. But my question is consciousness limited to humans, or can, we've talked about ghosts on this show, on cats and dogs and horses and whatever. So is this all limited to humans, or is other
parts of the animal world?
It's not limited to humans at all. Consciousness, awareness is, well, let me put it this way. My definition about what makes consciousness is that consciousness has choice. And if you have, when you have a concept like consciousness, there's a few other concepts that come in with it. One of them is free will. We have free will, and we have free will to make choices. Now, free will doesn't mean that we can get anything we want. It means that we have what I call a decision space. That's all the choices, all the decisions that you are aware of. Now, let's say you come to a fork in the road, and you have to make a decision, and you've got a lot of thoughts on it. You may have 10 or 20 choices. You could go to the right, you could go to the left, you could go back the way you came, you could go down to the right just, for one day, and then come back and go down to the left a day. There's all sorts of different things you could do. So if you list all those things that you know of that you could make that choice, then that's your decision space. And you have free will to pick one of those things you know about. Now, you may think that you've only got, say, 10 different choices. You may have 100 different choices, and you only can think of 10 of them, you see, because a lot of times there's choices and we don't know we have them. We have, limited vision, tunnel vision, and we don't see a lot of choices that we have. Well, consciousness has free will to choose among the choices that it is aware of, that it knows about. And that's what free will is. Okay, so now, let's see, where was I going with that? You asked me about animals. Well, animals are doing the same thing we are. Okay, animals are just like us. If they have a free will choice, they have consciousness. So we can look at dogs and cats and horses and see that they're making choices. They know what's going to happen next. They understand what's going on. They understand you're happy or sad or whatever, and they have choices about things that they can do. They can bark, or they can bite, or they can wag their tail, and they have these choices, and they get to make choices they have. Now, their decision set, their decision space is not nearly as large as humans. They don't have all the choices that we have, but they still have choices, which means they're conscious. Now, what about a bumblebee? Is a bumblebee conscious? Well, if it makes choices, then it's conscious too. And from my experience, I'd say a bumblebee is conscious, because I watched the bumblebee stalk my dad one day when I was a young guy, and he was out swatting at bumblebees, and they chased him inside, and one of them stayed right up above the door and hovered, and 5 minutes later or so, my dad looked out the door to see if all the bumblebees had gone, and he didn't see any, so he stepped out, and wham, he got stung right on the back of his neck. Now, as far as I was concerned, that was premeditation.
Premeditation. Free will was in it.
Premeditation. He had a decision, and he had made choices. So I'd say, yeah, bumblebees are conscious. So it's not just dogs and horses, but anything that has the free will to choose of different choices in its decision space. Now, you talk about a tree. Well, does a tree make choices? Well, you have to, hardwiring isn't a choice.
Right.
Okay, a sunflower will face the sun, and as the sun moves, the flower will move. Well, that's because one side of the stalk gets heated up by the sun, and the other side's in the shade, and that changes the stalk, and it makes the sunflower turn around. That's not a choice. That's just hardwiring. That's following an algorithm. That's following a sequence of events. So that's not a choice. Now, in some critters, it's really hard to tell whether they're actually making free will choices, or whether they're just following a hardwired pattern of instinct, or whatever else you want to call it. So you don't really know about everything, but that's my test. So does a tree make choices? Not that I know of.
Yeah.
Now, a tree may be aware in a very vague way, but I don't think they actually make choices. They certainly can't say, well, I don't like it here, there's too much shade, I'm going to take a little walk out there in the field where I get lots of sun. They can't make those kind of choices. Now, if somebody somehow figures up clever tests so that they can tell whether things are making choices or not, and biologists do that all the time. They make reports about things like that, then that's how they can tell whether something has free will, whether it's conscious or not. So all sorts of things are conscious, and basically they're doing the same thing we are. That dog and that cat has choices, and it evolves the quality of its consciousness by those choices. And if it makes good choices, it evolves. If it makes poor choices, it de-evolves, just like us. It's just on a smaller, working on a smaller scale with less with less variables than we are. It's not as complex.
And Tom, I would say that, just a closing comment here, I think you would probably agree with me. I've always come to the conclusion through time that basically rationality doesn't come from just material. Therefore, if something's just following its biological nature, then it doesn't have consciousness or awareness. It's basically just following an algorithm, and it's material, and it's determined to do that. If something is not predetermined, then it has free will, and it has to have consciousness. Right. That's the dividing line.
That's right. That's how I define define my decision space. So if it's just a rock rolls downhill, but that so if the hill shakes because there's an earthquake and the rock rolls downhill, it's not because it decides to.
Sure.
It just does what it has to do because that's the algorithm that it has to follow. So that doesn't mean that the rock has a choice whether to fall down a hill or not. It doesn't make any choices. So the rock's not conscious. But, bumblebees? Well, I wouldn't have known a bumblebee was conscious till I saw that one, premeditated to stalk my dad and keep that in his mind for at least 5 minutes, without losing track of that thought and that idea and that commitment. So to me, that says that bumblebee, and I don't know about all bumblebees, but that says that bumblebee knew what it was doing.
Yeah.
It had a plan and executed the plan.
Absolutely.
Hey, Tom, this has been absolutely fascinating, but we have quickly ran out of time here. We want to talk a little bit about your books and your videos and whatever else that you're currently working on.
Yeah, we want to promote your material a little bit to our audience before we get off. So.
Okay, well, let me tell you, if your audience is interested in learning more about this, I have to kind of apologize that all I did was make statements because in the time we had, I couldn't actually derive it all logically.
Sure.
But everything that I'm telling you is a logical derivation. It's science. It's not this is what I believe or this is what I think or what came to me in a dream. This is logic.
Sure.
And it's good science. And if you want to see how these things are derived, then first there's books, which is the My Big T.O.E. trilogy, and you can get those any place that you normally get books, like Amazon or bookstores. You probably have to have them ordered. Some of them carry it, some don't. But I have the books for free on Google Books. So if you want to read it for free, then you go to Google Books. Now, the books don't do as much science because they're books for everybody. So I do some in there, but I try to keep it at a minimum. It doesn't, a lot of people, if you talk too much like a scientist, their eyes roll up in their head and they don't, they want to go do something else.
Yeah.
So I kept that to a minimum, but I do talk about science sometimes in my YouTube videos. Every time I do a workshop, a lecture, an interview, anything that I can get the video or audio from, I put it up on YouTube so all the people that otherwise wouldn't hear it can hear it. So you go to YouTube and just go to YouTube, www.youtube.com, then / and TWCJR44, TWCJR44, and that'll take it to me. But the easiest way to get to me is just go to Google and Google Thomas Campbell or Google My Big T.O.E. If you do that, everything will turn up. Websites, Google, YouTube, everything will pop up on the first page. So you just Google me and you'll get it. Now there's a forum there if you have questions. And there's a lot of people who've been doing this, been thinking about these things for a long time on that forum. And if you have specific questions you'd like to ask, go join the forum. Go to my website first, which is www.mybigto.com. My Big T.O.E. is all one word, one thing. And then join the discussion group of the forum. It's free, or everything I do, I try to make free. And you can go in there and ask people, and you'll get answers to your questions. So that's a good place to take your questions.
All right.
I go give a lot of talks. Go to www.mbtevents, MBT for My Big T.O.E., but it's mbtevents.com, and you'll see where I might be talking in the future.
All right.
So that's about it. It's been a lot of fun, guys. Thanks for inviting me into your audience. I appreciate that.
Well, Tom, I want to say a big thank you for you taking time out on this evening from your time to come on to God Talk and talk with us. It's been great. We've enjoyed it. It's been fascinating, and I'm just really appreciative that you come on. We may want to have you back sometime. We have more questions, but we've gotten a good basic understanding of your theory and your work, and we'll continue to probe further as we divide the line between faith and science. So thanks for being here, Tom. We appreciate it.
Oh, you're quite welcome. Thank you.
All right.
All right. Thank you, Tom.
Bye-bye. Well, Doug, that was a fascinating encounter with our guest, Tom Campbell. He's an interesting guy. He's very believable, and he just told us his experience. It's an amazing story, but I believe it.
Let me jump in there and say, when we first started this interview tonight, I was not a believer. I was quite of a skeptic, and now I'm looking at hearing this guy thinking, I need to look more into this. This seems
absolutely.
Absolutely
well,
fascinating.
Now you believed in God before this.
Oh, yeah.
But you're saying about as far as his theory and remote viewing. Well, yeah. And of course, I'd already been researching this for a while, and I believed it before it started because I'd already done a lot of work in it. But it's a paradigm changer, and that's the point I want to make to the guest. This changes the paradigm as to how you see the world. We're not just material beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a material experience. It's backwards, and that's the thing that you're skeptical about, and I understand because it's the opposite of what we're really taught. But he's not the only one that thinks this, and I think if you look, there's a lot of neurophysicists and scientists out there that study consciousness and awareness who are coming to the same conclusion. And he said that, and that's very much true. The literature says that. And I would say by no means all neurophysicists, but it's getting close to half, and we're talking about a paradigm changer. So anyway, this has been a great show. I really appreciate Tom taking time to come on God Talk, and I hope that everybody got as much out of it as we did.
Okay, well, this is God Talk. It's brain candy for the thinking Christian, a bad day for the atheist, and a provocative question for the seeker.
And this is God Talk, your partner while you commute to work. It's a cure for your insomnia. It either keeps you up all night and you forget about the fact that you even need sleep, or you'll just sleep like a baby.
Hey, this is God Talk. You can find us at god-talk.com. You can find our audio files on SoundCloud or iTunes, and you can find our videos on YouTube. Thank you for listening.